Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In the last video, we went over how to set up an NX workspace with a NestJS API. We briefly went over how the NestJS setup works and all the various files that have been created for us. In this video, we're going to go over setups for tests and how to set up debugging as well, because both of those things are very important when you're working on NestJS APIs behind the scenes. So let's get started. Like I said in the previous video, the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this general API directory because, as I said, I want to put the tests in the actual execution of the general API directory. So I want that to be in there. Next thing I want to do is a search and replace. So I want to check through the application to see where this has been referenced, and you can see we have that down here. So I'm going to remove this from the actual NX.json. So this is the NX JSON file that's responsible for basically setting up some of the steps that we have. For example, if we're doing tests, we have a NestJS, we have an NX.js plugin in here, we have ESLint, and we have Webpack. So I just want to remove that line there so it's not part of it. At this point, we no longer have end-to-end tests, so let's add those back. If I come over here, I'm just going to create a new directory called test. And in the test folder, I want to basically create over here a app.spec.ts. This app.spec is essentially going to hold the end-to-end test like we had before, but it's a slightly different setup. So I'm about to write some code to just basically go through setting that up for us. I have SuperMaven enabled, which is what's basically doing the completion there in the code. So we're just going to do essentially set up an iNest application. So with the, if I bring up the app controller, if I can type, there we go. You can see here, the setup is slightly different. So in this case, we're going to do an app testing module. And then in the testing module, we're going to create testing module and pass in the controllers and the providers, which actually matches up to what we have with this over here. As you can see, if I can bring this here, you can see we have imports, controllers, providers. In this case, we have controllers and providers. Actually, because we don't have any imports, I can just remove this and it's fine, but I'll leave it. So it's a slightly different setup is what I'm trying to show. So in this case, we want to basically set up a Nest application, and then let's create a server set to any, because that will hold the server object that we'll be able to call in our tests. So first, I'm going to create a setup function, and in here, I'm going to do what it's suggesting I do, but I'm going to change some things around. So actually first I need to import this and also that as well, because that's coming from the app module. So in this case, I want to set up the imports. I don't need any providers, I think. For now, I don't need any providers. Let's assume that's the case. And then the app, I want to create a Nest application. So I'm doing module.create Nest application. And then I want to set the global prefix because that is what we had in the main.ts. You could see we're setting a global prefix. So I'm just reusing the same logic. And then I want to initialize the app. And then I want to start, in this case, grab the HTTP server after I start the server, essentially. So this is all looking good. I'm going to set up a before all. And within the before all, what I want to do is pass in an asynchronous function. And I want to call await setup. So this setup function gets called before all of the tests run. And after all, no guesses, no surprises there, I want to close the application so it just doesn't run anymore. This is complaining because I'm using any, and I'm in a test context, so I don't really care much. So I'm going to just disable it. And that's all good. By the way, in case you're wondering, I'm using something called SuperMaven. SuperMaven is a replacement for Copilot, and it's actually pretty quick in my experience, and it gives me pretty good responses. If you want to check it out, quickly bring up the website. Oh, SuperMaven. There we go. So for me, it works. I also use it in my NVim setup. It works with VS Code as well. So if you want to check it out, you're more than welcome to. And it also gives you access to all the various models that you would typically come across. So yeah, that's just a little aside. Cool. So at this point, I have my setup for my test, which is great. So what I'm going to do is essentially set up the test for the root. So in this case, we have, sure, let's go with that. I'm just looking at that. That does not look right. Of course, AI is not doing its job. So in this case, what I want is await request. Request should come from supertest. I don't think we have supertest installed. No, we don't. So let's quickly install that. So pnpm install supertest. So supertest is something that you use for, as the name suggests, testing your APIs. And actually that should be a dev dependency. So I'm just going to move that down. Oops. Supertest. And I'll also get on the types for supertest. I don't think it might not be needed. So let's see. Okay, so we can install that. That's all good. And that's updated as expected. So happy with that. So if I come back here, I should be able to import it at the top. No types. Yeah, as I expected. So I can do types, supertest, -s save dev. So I'm just going to save the dev dependency. And now we should have that. Yep, we're good to go. So with requests, we want to pass in the server that we have above, and then we want to run a get. And that should work as expected in theory. Let's find out. So if I run this, I can use Goland. Okay, we get a 404. And that is because we forgot the prefix. Yep. So we need to do /API. And that should run and give us a response that we're expecting. Awesome. So we've got our end-to-end tests now within the directory of general API. So in theory, if I were to just do this, I'll bring that up here, pnpm test. Oh, I haven't set this up. In the package.json, we also need to provide some scripts so we can actually use pnpm test, which is what I was about to do. I could do pnpx nx test general API, but this is a bit verbose. If I run it anyway, something went wrong. pnpx nx reset, something went wrong. So I'm just going to run an nx reset to solve that and do this. Yep, that solves that problem. So yeah, all the tests are passing, but you could see the command was a bit verbose. So I'm just going to do this. There we go. And I'm also going to add a serve as well, just so I can run the serve function easy. There we go. So now I should be able to do pnpm test general API. And there we go. The tests are passing, and we now have these. While we are here, let's actually set up the debugging. So within JetBrains, if you're not familiar, you can actually click this button here, and you can just set up debug. And it's not going to work because we need to specify targets. So I'll do that now. If I click over here, I can edit the configuration. And you can see over here, I can just say general API, which is the thing that we want to execute. And I'm just going to change the name to make it a little bit shorter. There we go. Save that. And I can execute this. And now it should start up in debug mode. And to test that it's actually working in debug mode, let's stop and start this application. I'm in debug mode, and if this doesn't catch, I need to look into something. Okay, it didn't catch. So there's a problem here. I believe that should be in the Webpack. Yes, that's right. So within Webpack, oh, this is something that I have installed because I have some tools with Goland. I just have some quality of life improvements. Anyway, so over here, I can do source map. That is something I need to do. So essentially the source map, if you're not familiar, is basically a mapping for your actual application. It's something that when, for example, with CSS, if you minify your CSS, ideally as a developer, you want to see the CSS if you're in a development environment. So when you enable source maps, it will generate it. So it's like a source of truth for where your code actually, oh, there's a cat. Sorry, I got distracted. There's a cat in my window. So it's a source of truth for your code so you can navigate it. Where in TypeScript, we can basically follow the transpiled code, and then we can be able to figure out where this has actually been called rather than following the JavaScript but following the TypeScript. So let's test this out. If I run this in debug mode, in theory, this should now catch, and it does. There we go. So you can see we dropped into the debug mode, and I can just do this. So at this point, I know that it's working, so it's all good to go. And I can just hit this resume, and let's test if this is actually working as expected. So this is working, and let's come over here, process console. If I hit this endpoint, you could see now we're actually in the debugger console. So if I hit this step into, I go into the service. So that's working as expected, and I can just forward the request, and we're good to go. So at this point, we have the tests going, so we can run the tests, we can run the application from the package.json, and we can set up debugging on JetBrains IDE specifically. If you use VS Code, you can look into some tutorials into how to set up debugging. Maybe that's something that I could do if you would like to learn more about debugging, I'm happy to record a video. I've also used VS Code in the past, so happy to do that. If you use NVim and you want to debug, don't ask me because I haven't figured it out yet. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to look at how to set up a Docker file for the general API and then set this up to run with Docker Compose, just so we have everything containerized. Because ideally with this setup, we want to, at the end, also have a database connection. So locally we could, get up and running fairly quickly and have a database that we can try stuff out with an ORM. In this case, I'll be using Prisma. So yes, stay tuned for that. And that's the end of this video. Catch you in the next one.